No. That's what you're thinking.
That sound come from though?
I just did this.
No, not that.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight's the fourth week of our 6-week series titled Celebrating Life, Understanding Death. And tonight's topic is how to live with grief and supporting children through loss. One of our speakers, Ms. Melanie Pelk, was not able to join us. We have Ms. Caitlin Burns, who's a licensed clinical social worker, and she works at a Time to Change, but has many, many years of hospice and grief and loss experience, and we're very happy to have her. Thank you for being here, Caitlin. I did want to say, out of all the topics for all the weeks, tonight's topic probably deserves its own 6-week or maybe longer series. So we're just going to be touching on grief, and we divided it into grief and also then specifically talking about helping children through grief, because we have a hard time in wanting to help our children and not knowing how to best speak to them about loss. And Caitlin has a lot of experience working with children. So again, we're just going to be touching on it, but we're very glad to have Caitlin here. She's a wonderful speaker and very knowledgeable. For those of you that hadn't been able to join us for weeks 1, 2, and 3, the library has amazingly got it on their YouTube channel. They've had it professionally subtitled. So all you need to do is log into the Leon County Library website and click on the YouTube button, and you'll have access to week 1 that was on faith and end of life care, week 2, the physical changes as we approach the end of life, and week 3, which was which was advanced directives and wills. So I'll be getting your arrangements in order. So with all that, I'll hand it over to Caitlin Burns. Thank you for being here, Caitlin.
Hey everyone. Hey, my name is Caitlin Burns, and as Betty said, I started my social work career at Big Bend Hospice, I guess now 16 years ago, because I've been gone for 2.5 years. And I was there for 14 years and spent all of my time, the first about 12 years exclusively in children's bereavement work. So that really is something that it's very near and dear to my heart. Then I continued and got some more additional training on trauma and PTSD, and then finished my time there as the manager of our bereavement department. So again, the bulk of my career as social worker really has been focused on grief and loss and trauma. I have not had a chance to present on this topic in a while, and I'm really, really excited to be here tonight with all of you and talking about this. I know there's an opportunity within the chat if you're on Zoom to type in questions, and it'll alert me if there's any questions. As Betty said, this is a very expansive topic that I could personally talk about for probably a week of seminars, and then lots of other people who know even more than me could talk longer. So I'm going to do my best to cover a good overview of grief and loss. We'll start to touch on a little bit about how to help youth, as Betty said, and then talk a little bit about other kinds of loss that can bring about a grief response in addition to a death. If you have had any personal losses recently, or if this topic brings up, if it's triggering for you, if it brings up thoughts and feelings about losses you've had in your life, that's very understandable. If there are things that you really would like to share that you feel like you need more time with, I'm happy to make sure I get some resources to our facilitators here. If you feel like you need additional grief and loss support, hopefully we'll have time to share some personal stories if people would like to do that. And I am gonna definitely solicit feedback from you all about some of these topics. But again, with our limited time, we'll get through as much as we can, as comprehensively as we can. I will say, originally I titled this presentation, Grief is Weird, because that's what comes up a lot when I'm talking to grieving people. In all my years working with kids and teens and adults, that is one of the most pervasive things that people say. Is this normal? Can this be normal? It just feels so weird. I don't feel like this is possibly the way I'm supposed to be feeling. And my general response is, there is no right way to feel, and grief is weird. It just is. I went with a slightly more professional title, but grief is weird. Grief is also any reaction to a perceived loss. I alluded to that as well. It is not just when we have a death of someone we care about. Anything that we perceive in our life as a loss, we can experience a grief reaction. It's a normal, natural, and necessary process. It is a very fluid and dynamic process. We'll get more into some more current models of grief. I'm sure everyone's heard of the 5 stages of grief. Forget about it. There's much more current ways of thinking about grief. Kubler-Ross was an incredible clinician and researcher and did so much to move forward the field of grief and loss. But when she came up with the 5 stages of grief, originally that was intended for what someone who is dying goes through themselves. So it wasn't, it's kind of gotten co-opted and applied to all grief everywhere. I still see it in popular culture, TV shows like today, it's really held on. And it's useful, but there are more, fluid, more current ways of looking at the grief process that we'll get into. Grief is holistic, and it is definitely messy. I really like this visual. I did not come up with it. I saw it a few years ago. Again, the stages of grief there on the left is more just a kind of, here's the nice, neat, this is the way it's supposed to go. The one on the right is what most people experience when they're grieving. There are no nice little linear loops or paths or steps or stages. It is a big old messy mess. And that's okay. That's what it is to grieve as a human being. When we talk about the holistic nature of grief, I think there's a lot of emphasis often on the emotional parts of grief, incredible sadness, deep sense of mourning, grieving, but grief also encompasses all of the other parts of our lives. And sometimes it's the other areas outside of our emotional experience that people really don't expect. People don't talk about as much, might be afraid to mention that they're having these thoughts or feelings. And it can really be where people start to get into that, this is so weird. Can any of you think of any physical symptoms of grief, the way that grief might manifest physically?
Exhaustion.
Exhaustion, absolutely. Total physical exhaustion, yes.
Sick to your stomach.
Yes, stomach upset, nauseous, no appetite, more appetite.
I feel like I was walking on quicksand. Everything just took.
Yes, that total sense of, I think the fancy French word is ennui. Just an overwhelming sense of, again, everything slows down, your body is slower, your energy is lower. Sleep is impacted by grief. Some people can't seem to wake up, some people can't fall asleep. What about mental or cognitive reactions to grief?
Very hard to concentrate. Yeah.
Can't focus, can't concentrate. Forgetfulness, depression.
You always have to have a list.
You always need a list, absolutely. I've heard it described as just a mental fog. you just, like, again, you can't remember anything. I used to do a lot of grief groups, and people would come in one night and say, I left here last week and I turned the wrong direction. Like, I was going home and I went the wrong way. Like, what's wrong with me? You know, grief brain, I've also heard it called. So again, that sense of, I can't remember things I used to be really quick with. I'm really slow with mentally. I just don't feel like I can take in new information. I'm faltering at work. I'm struggling to communicate with my partner, my family. All that can be part of grief. What about socially? How can grief impact us socially? Withdrawing? What's that?
You want to hide.
You want to hide away, isolating yourself? Some people go the other way. They don't want to be alone ever. They want to stay busy, busy, busy. For some people that, again, staying mentally or physically busy, they feel it can help kind of, stave off the deeper, harder feelings of grief. I'm going to catch up with you anyway, but that is sometimes the sense of, if I slow down, if I let myself slow down, I'm going to be too overwhelmed. So I just need to stay busy, stay out, be with people. Socially, sometimes when, half of a partnership dies, perhaps the person that died was the social calendar keeper. They were the one that made, double dates and made plans to go see movies and shows and even plan things with, children and grandchildren. So sometimes the partner who's now left without their social coordinator really struggles to connect, and perhaps didn't realize how much their partner did to help them, see people and stay connected to their communities. And what about spiritually?
I'd be angry at God.
Angry at God, absolutely. Some people find a great deal of comfort in their faith community, in their beliefs after a loss or a death. Some people get very disillusioned. Might be angry with God or angry with things people at church are saying. There's some messages from some faith leaders sometimes, or even just well-meaning people in your church community, that can come off as dismissive or insensitive. If you're really missing somebody and you keep hearing the message, well, don't be sad, they're in a better place. Like, well, I want them here. Like, I get that. Even if I believe that, it's okay for me to also want them to be here with me. And I've certainly heard people with very strong faith feel like they're being told they're being selfish, that they need to let this person, they need to celebrate the fact that they're, with God now. And some people do, and that's very helpful to them, but other people feel like they're not in that place. And that can also lead to some disillusionment, and that also might impact someone socially. If church is your really big social connection, and you're starting to feel a little bit resentful or hurt by messages you're getting at church, that can have a compounding impact. Also, spiritually, even people who are not religious can question their whole belief system. What does this death mean? Does it mean anything? Some people who've never been religious or spiritual start to wonder, well, am I never going to see this person again? I don't like the way that feels. And it can really lead to a lot of questions, not just adults, but also children and teens can have a lot of questioning their beliefs. Grief really can shake the foundation of who we feel like we are as a person. Our whole worldview, especially if it was a sudden, violent, traumatic, stigmatized loss, people can really question, like, this isn't supposed to happen to somebody like me. And it can shake up really every part of us as a person. And with all of these, by no means did we exhaust. We could brainstorm for 2 hours just on this part of grief. I just want to touch on it to remind people, again, if you're experiencing a loss, and like, why am I so tired? Why don't I want to go? I love my grandkids, but I just don't have the energy for it. If you've experienced a loss, even things that you loved, which you'll probably love again, might feel a lot harder for a while. And that's completely normal when we're grieving. The next few slides are about some more current ways of conceptualizing the grief process. The wave model is my favorite, something that I've again taught and spoke on for a decade and a half now. When I worked at hospice, our program for youth called the Caring Tree really took the idea of grief is like a wave from Donna O'Toole and turned it into this whole model. As you would often draw it out for people, have various handouts. I know it's a little small, so I apologize to you in the room. Again, I know this PowerPoint is being shared, so, or I can also get just a handout of this to anybody if they need it. But again, this looks at grief, it's very fluid, it's very, I don't ever mean that as a pun, but it is, it's the way model, it's fluid. It's very, very dynamic. A lot of this, it ebbs and flows, it might look like it has kind of a trajectory from one place to another. And in general, it does, but in each of these kind of phases of our grief, we're floating backwards, we're going forward, we're up, we're down, we're all over the place. So it starts off with little waves looking at kind of normal life, normals in quotes, everyone's normal is different. Ups and downs, which you kind of understand and know how to deal with it, how to process. Then the loss is represented by a lightning bolt. It really just kind of strikes our life and disrupts that normal. One thing that's not on this particular handout, that if I was drawing it out, I do, often that period of time between the lightning bolt and the first big wave, I'll draw a lot longer because there can be an extended sense of shock, numbness. I don't know what's going on. It doesn't feel real. You understand cognitively that this happened, but it does not, it's not computing just yet. So things can look like nothing's going on, but under the surface, as we know, in the ocean, a lot is happening. But eventually the reality sets in, you begin to feel bigger, stronger waves of grief. This is not a single big wave of grief. It's just as this process of things settling in and becoming more real happens, they kind of come in big swells. Throughout this process, you're kind of trying to work into or understand what your new normal is going to be. It's never going back to the way it was before. I don't like the phrase back to normal because that normal that was before the loss is no more. You can find a new normal, a different space, figure out who you are now, what your life looks like now, but it will absolutely be different. In that time that we're kind of sorting that out, big waves are still happening. Grief triggers can happen, which is anything that reminds you of your loss. Any examples of grief triggers for you all? Anniversaries, songs, birthdays, holidays. Anything sensory can be very powerful. So again, songs, particular noises, certain smells, someone's cologne or perfume, the way it smells outside certain times a year. There's some tree, and my brother would be so mad that I still can't remember what it is. I think maybe it's a hickory, that when it's blooming, it takes me back to my grandma's house in the country in Missouri immediately. Doesn't matter where I am, I just stop in my tracks and, oh, Grandma May, it reminds me of her and where she lived. So a grief trigger doesn't necessarily have to bring up this enormous wave of grief that overwhelms you. It absolutely might, often in very inopportune places like grocery stores or driving or trying to have a nice dinner with friends. But it might just bring up more of a bittersweet kind of, I really just, I'm in a moment with that memory. And you can kind of move through that. Again, a grief burst is often run on by a grief trigger. It's just kind of, again, that sudden, intense outpouring of feeling. It might be crying, it might be suddenly I'm really angry and I don't know why. Really, it just physically overwhelmed. I got to get out of wherever I am. Then towards the end, some things to think about. The little life preserver is representing kind of throwing yourself a lifeline, taking a grief break. Grief is hard work. It's work. And sometimes you feel like if I'm not in it all the time, then I'm not doing justice to my loved one. Am I moving on too quickly? Am I forgetting? But being able to intentionally take a break, be like, I need to go see a funny movie. I need to spend time with some friends. I need to play with my pet or garden or whatever it is that you enjoy doing, and allow yourself to take a break. You can always return to your grief later, or it will return to you whether you want it to or not. And then the boat and the anchor. The boat represents coping. The goal of grief is never to get over it. The goal is to move through it and find your way through that loss. You don't get over loving somebody. You don't need to get over loving somebody. So again, that's not the goal. The goal is to find your way through it. And the boat represents things that help keep you afloat. You know, people that you love, activities that are, grounding for you. It might be your faith, it might be your family, your friends, your animals, anything and everything that kind of helps you stay afloat when you feel like you're about to drown. And then the anchor are just things to kind of pay attention to that might weigh you down in your grief. It's not so much that they are always unhealthy things, but things in excess. Even looking at pictures, there's nothing wrong with looking at pictures. If you're looking at pictures 7 hours a day, that might be becoming an anchor for you, something that's just kind of getting you stuck and not allow you to move through this process and ride those waves. Does that make sense? Any questions about the wave model? Again, not the only way to conceptualize grief, but I found it to be useful from 5-year-olds to 100-year-olds. Another is the dual process model. I hear when I'm talking to grieving people, just the way they speak about their grief really looks a lot like the wave model and about this. Just talking about how we are often, I always think of an oscillating fan, just oscillating back and forth between more of our loss orientation and a restoration orientation. So it's not about, I've got to do all my grief work and then I'll be ready to live again. It's like today I'm in it and I can't hardly move and I can't stop crying. And then tomorrow I feel okay. I can go to work, I can talk to people, I can do what I need to do. And then halfway through that day, I'm back over here, struggling again. And it is more of kind of sometimes the oscillations are very, very fast. You're back and forth between those two states 10 times in an hour. Other times you're spending, more time feeling more restoration focused, and then other times you're more loss oriented. Any questions about that one? And then finally, the tier model is based on the tasks of grief by William Worden. He's done lots and lots of research and writing about grief. It's a nice little acronym, which is nice. The T talks about to accept the reality of the loss. You can see echoes of that in the wave model. Again, when and how long it takes to accept that reality is different for everyone. The E looks at the allowing yourself to experience the pain of the loss. And again, that's just kind of not trying to bury it or hide it, but just allow it to happen. To adjust to a new environment without, I forgot my rest of my sentence there, without the lost person. And then reinvesting in a new reality. So you can see there's a lot of similarities in all three of these models. But what I like about more current models rather than a stage model, again, it allows for a lot more just reality, and there's less concern with, well, I haven't finished being angry, so I can't move on to whatever my next step is supposed to be. You might experience all those stages of grief that Kubler-Ross talked about every day, none at all. They're all very common aspects of a grieving process, but I've known a lot, I think I've had as young as middle schoolers talk to me about aren't I supposed to be like angry now? Isn't that one of the stages? Well, you might be, but you don't have to be. So even very young people can start to get this sense of I'm doing it wrong. I have to do it this way. This is the way it's supposed to be healthy. And that's not true. There's as many different ways to grieve as there are people on the planet. It's more about thinking about things that are going to help you experience it and move through it versus things that might get you stuck and weighed down in that process. So moving into a little bit more talking about children and grief, and I'm saying children and a broad span to mean youths, I guess, 18 and under. There are certainly things, and I'll try to point this out when we get to them, that are going to be a little different depending on the age of the young person that you're dealing with. And everything we talked about already, the holistic nature of grief, the wave model, different ways of talking about grief, that all applies to children and teens as well. They experience grief in every part of themselves. It might look different in a 5-year-old. How grief impacts a 5-year-old socially is going to be different than a 60-year-old, but it still might impact, if they're used to always going after school every day to hang out with grandma, and now grandma's not here anymore, that's a part of that child's social life, which is not gonna happen anymore. So some things that grieving children need. Patience, time, and compassion, which should not surprise anybody. But I think it is sometimes something that they don't get a whole lot of, especially if they're part of a family that's grieving. It can be very difficult for adults who are also grieving to be patient with a child who's grieving, because they can have a lot of needs, they can have a lot of questions. And being present for that can be very challenging. Safety and routine, particularly, I think it's true for all ages of kids, but with younger children especially, even really, really little kids, infants and toddlers can sense a change in their routine. You know, if a certain caregiver has always been there at a certain time, and then suddenly that person's not there anymore, they may not be able to express that verbally, but you're probably going to see it in being more irritable, maybe not sleeping as much as they used to, crying more, harder to settle. So those routines, I think, equal safety a lot for young people. I know sometimes, again, it's very hard to have a routine when your whole life's been turned upside down. I've certainly known parents of grieving children to think, well, I know how much they're struggling. I don't really want to push it about school. I don't want to, bedtimes have just been out the window for a while. And for a while, I completely understand. But getting kids and teens back to a routine, again, I think often helps them feel safer. Things feel more expected, more predictable, because what happens with a lot of kids who lose a parent, a sibling, anyone really close to them, is their worldview, just like it can be for us as adults, is totally shattered. This was not supposed to happen. They don't understand what this means or what to do with it. But if they know they can expect, okay, I'm still gonna go to school every day, if I can't go to grandma's, I know where I'm gonna go instead, and reestablish that sense of their new normal. They need adults who are also taking care of themselves and modeling healthy coping. Doesn't mean that we have to be the perfect grievers as adults with children, but part of that is letting kids know it's okay to cry together. We don't have to hide that from children. We don't necessarily want young kids to feel like they have to take care of their parents all the time, but finding ways to grieve together as a family, not being afraid to express emotion in front of children, letting them know when you don't have an answer to a question. We don't have to have all the answers for children, but being able to be honest and say, I don't know why this happened, or I'm really struggling to understand, especially in a traumatic or a sudden loss, I don't know why, this person did what they did. It doesn't make sense to me either. It's really hard, and we're going to work together to try to figure out how to make sense of it. And I think kids seeing grown-ups, if everybody needs extra support, seeing mom or dad go to a counselor, go to a grief group, helps normalize that for kids too. This is something that we can all use. It's not just for grown-ups, and I'm not going to make you go, middle schooler, but I'm not going. So, and I've worked with a lot of kids whose parents did that to children, like, I'm fine, they need help. And I'd often tell adults, one of the best ways to take care of your kids is to take care of yourself. Because if you're falling apart constantly and you can't function and help them feel safe, they're not feeling safe. I don't mean any judgment of that whatsoever, but just that it's, again, that's the modeling of healthy coping. I kind of touched on this, the need not to be parentified. I've certainly known, again, pretty young kids who were told very overtly. Sometimes they just get the idea themselves, but sometimes they are told very clearly by some other adult, well, your dad's gone, you're the man of the house now. You're willing to step up and help with your brothers and sisters. And I think people can be well-intentioned with this. They want to give a child a sense of responsibility, of purpose. That's a lot of weight to put on a kid's shoulders, or even a teenager's shoulders. And also, again, if a parent is not getting the help and support that they need, again, children will often step in and take care of their parent. It's like, well, I can't cry because mom's always crying. Like, I need to make sure she's okay first. And it can be really scary to see a parent so distraught that, again, you don't feel like it's safe anymore. So again, just really encouraging parents, and again, not to feel like they've got to have it all together all the time, but to get their own support so kids can still be kids and teens can still be teens. Honest, age-appropriate information, something that can happen a lot when we don't know what to say to children or how to say it. Also goes along with this next one of taking their lead, answering the questions asked. I know I certainly fell, victim to it when I was newer at this years ago, of over-explaining things, of getting so caught up in like, I want to get this right, I don't want to say the wrong thing, I don't want to be scary, I want to be accurate, and suddenly you're explaining something in such detail, and that is not what they asked about. They like, oh, that's great, but what I asked was, when are we going to see grandma again? And maybe they met the other grandma who's still alive, and you've gone into this explanation of heaven and earth and afterlife and all this. Euphemisms can be very comforting, I think, for us as adults, but they can be very confusing for children. Talking about even with pet loss, they went to sleep, God came, and I know that there are kids who heard this when they were kids and they're adults now and still are kind of salty about it. I was told, not me specifically, but people will say, well, I was told, the angels came to take my brother. Like, well, who the heck are these angels? Why are they coming snatching people out of their beds? Like, that's a very, if you're a more literal black and white thinker as a child, that's kind of scary. Adults were trying to make it gentle and easier to swallow. But again, if that's just all you hear as a kid, you don't know exactly what it means, and it can be pretty frightening. And there's absolutely age-appropriate language to use to talk to even very young kids, really about any kind of loss, as scary as that can be. I've coached, parents and even other therapists through how to talk to young kids about a suicide. That is not an easy thing even for adults to talk about. But there are ways to talk about how even, like kids understand that people get sick in their bodies, and you talk about how some people have sicknesses that affect their minds more, and they have a really hard time feeling like things are going to get better, and they don't have any hope. And sometimes they feel so bad and like there's nothing they can do to feel better, and it's not going to get better, that they decide to take their own life. And again, that's not a conversation I want to have with a child, but you can have that kind of conversation with a child. And often, again, keeping it simple, age appropriate, and when they have, and often letting kids know, does that make sense? Do you have more questions? Again, trying to follow their lead and not get way ahead of what they actually want to know and what they're ready to hear. I've worked with kids whose parents died by suicide, and they know that it was they took their own life, but they don't know how until they're older. They may not want to know. It may not, again, it's not appropriate for a 9-year-old to have all the details about that. But to know the truth, to know how their person died, I think is really important for kids and teens. So also with kids and teens that were lied to as young children, because the parent didn't think they were ready or they were too young, and then they get to be teenagers and find out the truth, and it's like a whole re-grieving process because they feel like it changes things for them. And again, nothing wrong with people needing guidance on how to have these conversations, being able to ask professionals on this is what I'm planning to say, how does that sound, anything that I could tweak or change. But again, the old honesty is the best policy. With those kind of bumpers, think about a bowling lane, the bumpers of how old is this kid and what are they actually asking to know about. To be given options whenever possible. Even again, I worked in hospice care for a long time, and some people would feel like, well, they have to come say goodbye. They're going to regret it if they don't say goodbye to their grandmother so close. They might, but if a child is very, very resistant and does not want to do that, I generally don't encourage them to be forced to do that. Find other options. Do you want to write a letter? Do you want to send a picture? Is there something that, if the person is well enough to like correspond back and forth, you can still communicate, even if the child or teen is not ready or doesn't want to be in the same space with that person. Same for funerals and memorial services. You know, people feel very differently about them. Some people really, really feel like it's important to be there to, again, kind of help the reality of the loss begin to sink in. Some people are like, I just don't want to do it. I don't want to see them like that. I don't want to remember them like that. So again, giving them choices either way, not assuming they shouldn't go and they can't go, or that they have to. And certainly if a child or a teen is going to go to a service and they've never been to anything like that before, again, appropriate information. Here's probably what you're going to see. This is what the space might look like. There's probably going to be people you know and people you don't know. You know, the casket might be there in the front, and that's where, you know, grandma's going to be. She might look a little bit different. You know, if they want to, you know, touch her hand, she's going to be cold. I think my boss told me the story years ago of a kid apparently had been ruminating on this for a long time and finally asked the question of, you know, when we saw grandpa in the coffin, like, why did they take his legs off? Because it was closed. And they didn't know it was just covering up his legs. And it's kind of thing, again, as adults, we know that, and you can assume that people, you know, kids would know that. But just being able to, you know, again, if you're standing there with a kid, like, do you have any questions? Like, does anything look weird to you? Is anything confusing? You know, just to help them fill in the gaps that we wouldn't even think of, you know, as adults sometimes. I've alluded to this too, to understand that they might re-grieve as they age. I've certainly known kids that I was able to work with, and it was a beautiful thing. They maybe lost a parent when they were 6 or 7, and I got to work with them for 14 years, you know, and see them through, you know, when they were graduating high school. And how they experienced the loss of that parent really changed as they grew up. You know, once having the milestones of going to high school, graduating from high school, getting their driver's license, having proms, all that kind of stuff. And then every time another big milestone would come up, they would re-experience a lot of those feelings of loss and grief. I worked with a lovely young woman who was like that, and she came to our grief camps that we used to have every year, starting when she was like 7 or 8. And she said it was her date with her dad. You know, she wasn't always intensely grieving, but once a year she would come to grief camp and have this time to think about her dad, share stories about him, do a memorial project, and just spend that time, you know, honoring what this loss meant to her at kind of each phase in her life. And it was really cool. Any questions about any of this stuff so far?
You may be alluding to this later, but are there specific resources? I'm thinking like storybooks or something geared to age groups.
Yes, I don't have that in this PowerPoint, but I can definitely get that to be distributed. And there's a few that I can definitely mention that are some of my favorites for sure. We talked about that already, the space and time to come with questions. Younger children often need to ask the same questions over and over again. That's just developmentally very appropriate for a young kid. And again, you may feel like, I just hit that explanation on the head. Like that was top-notch, you know, parenting, adulting with that explanation. And then 2 hours later, they're back with the same exact question. It's like, damn. And it's not that you didn't do a great job. It's just that for younger children, they need the reassurance. They need to check back. And like, is this really, am I getting this right? Like, did I hear you right? So let me check in again. And that's part of them kind of reestablishing their new normal. They need to keep checking to see if the information is the same. So again, that consistency, that compassion, that patience. Older youth might need permission to explore how their loss impacts their beliefs. I mentioned that earlier, especially if they've grown up in a very religious or spiritual household and upbringing, and a significant loss is really having them question some of the things that they've grown up with. Having the space to ask those questions can be really, really meaningful and healing to teenagers, I think, especially. And older youth may turn more to their peers than to the grown-ups in their life, which can be hard for adults because we want to make sure our teens are okay. They're not talking to me, what's going on, I don't know anything. I work with a lot of teenagers now still, and there's just things that teenagers are comfortable telling me as their counselor that they're not comfortable telling mom and dad for all kinds of reasons. So making sure that even if they're not talking, if you have teenagers in your life or other in any form or fashion, that even if they don't want to talk to their parents, they can really talk to another trusted grown-up, maybe a family friend, counselor, a coach. And if there are options for grief camps, peer support groups, that sort of thing, that can be so incredibly helpful to all ages, but I think particularly children and teens who can feel like I'm the only one who's lost a parent. There's nobody else in my class who's had a mom or dad die. And that might be true, but it's probably not. Sadly, when we would do grief groups in schools, and kids didn't know that this other person had somebody die too. And they get together in the same space and there's freedom to talk about that. It can be it helps normalize it. It validates that they're not weird. Grief is weird, but they're not weird. This is a natural part of life and it's okay to talk about it. So shifting a little bit to a little bit more about some non-death losses that can impact us very much. Disenfranchised grief is a term that Kenneth Doka came up with. He has a whole book about it. And it can be certain kinds of losses that are a death, but certain deaths that are more stigmatized, hard to talk about. If somebody dies by suicide, overdose, AIDS, or like an illness that is more, people might say, self-imposed. There can be a lot of stigma around that, and it can be really hard to talk about it. And so then people feel like their grief is pushed to the outskirts. They're not allowed to share about their son that died by suicide because people are uncomfortable with that, or it's not the same as somebody who died from cancer. But also non-death losses can also be disenfranchised as well, because people just don't understand that they can have a full-blown grief process over it. As we can disenfranchise ourselves, certainly, and also other people in your life might be like, come on now, it's time to move past that. Was it that big of a deal? Or other such sensitive comments that we can make to one another. So any significant life transition can involve loss and therefore grief. And again, not an exhaustive list at all, but these are all things that obviously can bring about a pretty significant grief reaction. Pet loss is one that I think some people completely get and are on board with. Other people who are not pet people, or who have pets but don't have that same kind of relationship with their animals, don't get it, don't think it's as deep. I can tell you some of the most profound grief I've ever witnessed firsthand has been pet loss, of people just deeply, deeply grieving the loss of a cherished pet. Natural disasters are very familiar with in our neck of the woods. Any kind of illness, and of course, particularly serious illness, a diagnosis of a terminal illness or just an illness that's going to be very limiting. There's so many losses that can come with the trajectory of something like ALS or Parkinson's. Moving. And again, all of these can impact people of all ages as well. These are not things that would just be for adults or kids. Retirement. I've worked with plenty of people who are really, I think their significant issue as they come to counseling is grief happening from retirement, from a significant life change. Everything is different about their life. It was supposed to be fun and games and be amazing, and they're really struggling. It is what they wanted. They are happy, but there's so many things they have to say goodbye to in that process that it's really a struggle. Children moving out of the home, whether because they're going to college or they're just moving out, that's another huge emptiness. Syndrome is a really big deal. Changes in someone's mobility, which could be from an accident, again, it could be from illness, just aging. I'm in my early 40s and my knees are not cooperating. It makes me sad sometimes, and it's frustrating. And if that continues, in a a more negative trajectory, that I can definitely foresee there continuing to be grief if I can't do all the things that I want to do because of something going on with my knees. I didn't intend for the pandemic to be front and center, but I'm glad that it ended up there. Again, we could talk for 2 hours, for the next 2 weeks about all of the losses and grief that came out of the pandemic. So much changed for so many people. Of course, including many people died. Lots and lots of people died. I know people personally that died. I'm probably just what everybody does, whether it was close family or friends or people in your church group, in your social circles. And then just all the changes that it brought about for the 2.5 years that nothing could be the way that it used to be. Was it ever going to be the way it used to be? All the division that it brought up for so many people within families. Families stopped speaking to each other. It's really rough. It was rough for a long time. And I think that kind of prolonged, more macro level grief, it impacted all of us deeply personally, but it was also everywhere all the time. I still don't think we have fully understood, and may not for a very, very long time, how this has impacted all of us personally and our communities and our society in general. One that's a little more existential, but I've also heard a lot of people about, is the loss of hope or an idea or a dream. I always thought I would be married by X age. I always wanted to, buy a house, or I thought that I would write a book or, meet this goal or that goal. And if those things don't happen and things transpire to make it clear it's not going to happen, it's not just delayed, but it's not going to happen, it can be incredibly painful. And that's also very much, it's squishy. It's kind of a squishy loss. It's hard to talk about, or people to understand. Nobody died, like I'm healthy, I'm safe, I'm fine. And yet, I'm not fine, because this big thing that I always thought would be a part of my life is not a part of my life anymore. Addiction, yourself or the people in your family can have tons of grief associated with it. Even if no one dies, just dealing with chronic addiction or mental illness. Excuse me. And with addiction and mental illness, there can be a lot of, again, misinformation, stigma, difficult to talk about it. But again, it can really change family dynamics. It can lead to estrangement just further down the line. Incarceration, again, certainly of an individual or someone in your family being incarcerated or involved in the justice system in any way, again, can lead to loss of some of those hopes and dreams, and also the physical loss. This person is not here with us, they're not with the family. And that incarceration is very, very difficult, obviously, on children as well. Divorce, of course, the people going through the divorce are going to experience a great deal of grief. And what surprises some people that I've worked with is even if the divorce is something that they very much want, they can still grieve. Even if somebody, was unfaithful and the person is like, this was not a good marriage, I need to get out, I know I'm better off. Again, it's a loss of a hope and a dream. This was not the way this was supposed to go. And there's obviously a reason why those people initially got married, so there can be the loss of what you expected from this person, the person you thought that they were. In some ways, it's like a death, because the person and the experience that you were anticipating doesn't exist anymore. Estrangement, again, can be from any and all reasons. And again, the pandemic brought about a lot of estrangement in the last couple of years with families. And infertility, another thing that has just so much grief and loss wrapped up in it. Again, it's the part of it is an idea. I always wanted to have children. I expected it to be easy. Now, not only is it not easy, but it's costing us all this money and it's not working, and stress between partners with that. I've certainly worked with a number of people where infertility issues was causing a tremendous amount of grief and therefore a tremendous amount of stress, personally for them and in their relationships. Any other big ones people can think of that are not on this list? Again, not exhaustive. I tried to come up with as many big deal ones that I could but I know from my experience, people really struggle with. So some notes on kind of moving through grief. If you read this, it says, this person saying, "Good night, Dad, I miss you," like talking to their portrait and saying, "Yes, this is normal." And it is normal. Finding ways to memorialize both formal and informal can be really, really important to people when they're grieving, including children and teens. You know, it can be as simple as, again, having a picture that every night you say good night or say good morning. I know people who will listen to an old voicemail a lot just to hear that person's voice. Create just kind of a little special, you know, in some South American cultures, they do it really, really well with the whole Day of the Dead. They have ofrendas, which is a little special altar where there's pictures of the people who have died in the family. And, you know, it's a part of everyday culture to look at and honor and remember those that are no longer with us. So they can be, again, formal things like a memorial service, a funeral, visiting somebody's grave, or it can be just small little things that people do whenever they, you know, whenever it strikes them. Continuing bonds, you know, and I've seen the quote, "Death ends a life, not a relationship," attributed to several different people. So I don't know where it originally came from, but I think it's very true, and I really love that quote. There's been a lot of research done on continuing bonds to say that it's really healthy to continue a relationship with somebody who's no longer here physically. There was a time where that was the predominant belief was if someone dies, you get sever ties, you can move on and be healthy. Well, it doesn't happen anyway, so I'm glad that it's not the healthy way to do it. And again, whatever those continuing bonds look like, people will wear clothing from their loved one. You know, this was my mom's bracelet, so I wear all the time now. I like to still have a conversation with them when I'm driving and like think about what they would say to me or wonder, you know, what's this person doing now? Or if this person was here with me, we'd be talking about this, you know, just that continued relationship. Extraordinary experiences is also something that's been more researched lately, which are, some people look at them in the spiritual category of grief, not everybody. Something that a lot of people didn't used to talk about because they thought it was like a really weird part of grief. Noticing, and really it can be very, very personal, but feeling like things happen that you can't fully explain, that make you feel connected to this person. One that I've had several times, a dear friend of mine that I worked with at hospice passed away in April of 2020. And we had this whole story about googly eyes. We worked together with grieving children and we loved googly eyes, and we found like self-adhesive ones that you just like peel off the back. And we did a presentation one night about children in grief and how adults could grieve more like children and help themselves. And Anna and I were cleaning up, and I look at the back of her head and there's a googly eye, like right on the back of her head. I was like, Monica, did you put that there? She's like, what are you talking about? Take a picture of it and she took it off. No idea how it got there, how she did googly eye on the back of her head. Since she's died, at least 2 different times, I have found googly eyes in the strangest place. One time there was one on my door, sitting above my door handle of my car at a park. No idea how it got there. And then I found one on the bottom of my shoe one time. I was like walking, and I was like, what is that? And it was a googly eye. Perhaps there's an explanation for both of those, but to me, it's Monica. And I have so many friends at Delhi that have things, you know, when they're feeling down. I have a friend who always gets feathers from her dad. We'll find feathers, and again, like would have come in here tonight, there'd be a feather here. Just things that why would there be a feather there? And there are. Melanie, who wasn't able to be here, with her and her mom, it's pennies. She finds pennies and dimes all over the place.
I had that same experience with a friend of mine who passed away. Feathers, you know, not just laying around, but standing straight up in my path or something like that. But the other thing I was thinking of, if anybody doesn't know about this, Gary Bergshine has for years been doing his, what's it called? There's, you know, that
Listening to, I know what you're talking about, and I can't think of it.
It's a whole
It's
course,
like
it's
G
like
death or
something, the case against death.
Yes.
That's it, the case against death. And it's a 4-session course most of the time, although we can do it shorter. But there's a whole section on experiences like this that people have. And there's a guy who's written a whole book about it that, actually researched, and there was something like 23 different kinds of things, smells or whatever, that people experience. Some people even phone calls, they pick it up and hear their partner's voice for a brief time or something. So it's something that definitely happens and has even been researched and compiled.
Absolutely. And I know that I think there's a book called Extraordinary Experiences, and I'm not sure who it's by. But again, I have countless stories like that from working again with kids and teens and adults for so many years in grief and loss, and just beautiful things. And again, people could try to explain it, and maybe there's an explanation or it's a coincidence or whatever. But I think the beautiful thing is what they mean to us, and what it means to feel like you've got that connection, like this person isn't fully gone. It's that reassurance, exactly. It's beautiful, and I've never met anybody that didn't find it helpful. If anything, I've met people who haven't had those experiences who are really resentful because they want to have a dream. They want something like that. And dreams too. I've had very vivid dreams about people who have died, where again, even in the dream, I'm like, you died. Like, what are you doing here? And it's like, yeah, I know, but like, good to see you. Like, we have a conversation, about it and about missing them, and like, I really wish I could talk to you again. And this can be difficult because when you wake up, if it feels really real, in a way, it's like you lost that person again in a small way. But overall, again, those continued connections, that sense that this relationship is not over. The person may not be here physically, but we absolutely still have a relationship. Keeping or changing traditions, especially again, I've had whole other presentations just about grief in the holidays, because holidays can just be rife with like grief landmines about how to navigate that. Everything feels charged and difficult, and do we do what we always did, or do we do nothing that we used to do? And so encouraging people to have those kinds of, just the family, just be able to talk about it. So maybe we'll do some of the same stuff, but let's start a new tradition as well. We can still include this person, still wrap a present for them, put it under the tree, set a place for them at the table, listen to their favorite music. It could be anything and everything, but there's no right or wrong way to do that. Some people want to be like, I just can't do it. I'm going to Hawaii for Christmas. I'm pretending it doesn't exist this year. Okay, that's fine too. Again, group support, individual counseling. I know there's a lot, I think more and more probably popped up because of the pandemic, but there's a lot more online support, which any online support, it's not always created equal. You have to kind of do a little research about, who's running this. Is it purely peer support, which would just mean there's no real professional in charge. It's just kind of people getting together to share experiences and support one another. Is it facilitated by somebody? Is it following a curriculum? All those kinds of things can make a difference depending on what you're looking for. And of course, individual counseling. I'll also say, and I'm not saying this to brag about myself at all, but not all counselors are comfortable talking about grief. Personally, I think it's a travesty because it's such a universal experience. We just had that slide of grief is a part of so much of our lives, but there are some counselors who consider it a specialty and will be upfront, which is wonderful, of like, that's not really something I do. So again, even if you're seeking counseling after a loss, it's okay to ask, is grief and loss something that you're comfortable talking about? Is it a specialty area for a counselor or not? To make sure you're going to get with somebody who can, help you carry that burden. Who's not going to be like, ooh, let's talk about something else. Lastly, again, as much as I'm, rail against that the 5 stages of grief are not the end all be all, this is a really beautiful quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The reality is you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal and you will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole, but you will never be the same again. Nor should you be the same, nor should you want to. It is exactly 7 o'clock. I have not seen a Zoom question. Anybody here in the room have any questions before we wrap up? Anybody has a microphone?
Question.
Ready?
That way they can hear.
Any final comments?
I'd like to say that was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I'm amazed at how well you were able to discuss and cover so many aspects of grief and give also such good guidance on how do we help children and youths.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. That was
I
excellent.
think there is a Zoom.
Oh, wait, we do have a Zoom question.
Hold me.
Question just come in. It says, where do you conduct your counseling? How can I get in touch with you?
In case you didn't hear, so where do I conduct my counseling? I work for a counseling agency called A Time to Change. It is here locally in Tallahassee. There's also an office in Crawfordville, but I work in Tallahassee primarily. You can find A Time to Change counseling online. And you can give our office a call if you want to get in touch with me. Yes. I will mention a couple of books because somebody asked about books that are good for kids. One of my all-time favorites I used to use all the time at hospice and still do is called When Dinosaurs Die. It's by Mark and I think Kara Brown. It's the same author that writes the Arthur series of books. Familiar with Arthur? They have a couple different ones on more difficult topics. They have ones about divorce and I think one about being a good steward to the environment. But they're one about grief and loss and death and dying. When Dinosaurs Die is excellent. It's kind of broken up into sections. You can read just a part of it. It talks about what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to die? In very, gentle but accurate terms. And then it talks about different ways people might die, including suicide, including addiction. That talks about grief, death rituals, memorializing. It kind of covers the whole gamut in a really, really great book. That's probably my top. I would say probably elementary school. I've used it with up to 5th graders, I think. And with some of the older kids, a trick that I used to do sometimes if I wanted to share it with older kids, is say, I want to use this book with some younger kids. Will you read it for me? Tell me what you think. So then they don't feel like they're being talked down to, but they're still getting the same information.
That's a great.
Yes.
What do you suggest to me with a loved one's possession of clothing?
Gentleman asked, suggestion for what to do with a loved one's possessions. That is a very, a deeply personal decision, certainly. I guess in the most general terms, I would encourage people not to get rid of everything immediately, because sometimes that can be kind of a knee-jerk reaction to, it's just too difficult, I don't want to look at it, it's too hard to be reminded, and then you might wish you'd kept something further down the line as your grief progresses. There is no one right or wrong thing to do with it. Some people don't want to give away anything, don't want to change anything. And again, I think that that's wrong. Again, kind of going back to the wave model, if it becomes something that you feel like you cannot allow yourself to move forward at all because of the things, that might be an indicator that you need. And some people need a lot of help because they don't feel like they can do it by themselves. I would definitely encourage people not to be afraid to seek support from other family. Certainly to check with family. Does anybody, this is what I'm ready to get rid of or donate. Does anybody else want to come and check and see if anything that you want before I do that? A lot of people do find it nice to feel like their loved ones' things are going to be useful still. If you know your loved one, let's say, love to cook and they've got a huge cookbook collection. finding a way to pass those on to a local library, to pass them on to the senior center, to places that they would still be useful, can make, grieving people feel a lot better. And it's not just going to a landfill, it's gonna be passed on to people that really would appreciate it and understand its value. So it's kind of skirting the question. But again, because it's such a personal thing, I would always be hesitant to say, you have to do this or don't do that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for having me.
Forgot to ask you to complete this.
There is a survey. I'm assuming Zoom people also have access to a survey. And if you're here in person, it's on your desk in front of you. Just a little questionnaire.
And there's a little box right back here, it's even, that your completed surveys.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.